One night, the kingdom of Varian looked like a dream. The sky was dark blue and bright with stars, the marble towers of the city shining under 2 calm moons. People filled the streets laughing, dancing, and pointing toward the heavens. The air smelled of flowers, food, and hope. Every year during the falling star night, the queen held a grand gala in the palace. It was said that anyone who saw a shooting star that night would have their life changed forever. Miles Carter had never believed in such things. He was a simple man, an engineer who fixed engines, bridges, and broken tools. He came from a small town where the people rose before dawn and rested only when their hands could no longer work. Yet that year, his employer had sent him to the capital to repair some palace machines used for the celebration. He never imagined that one evening would turn his whole life upside down. While nobles dressed in silver and gold filled the wide halls, Miles stood near the back doors, adjusting a faulty lampstand. He wore clean but plain clothes, his hair loose from the long day. He planned to finish his work, leave quietly, and rest in the inn. But when the crowd gasped and the music slowed, he looked up and saw her. Queen Leora stood at the center of the hall, her blue gown reflecting the lights like a river under moonlight. She did not need jewels to appear royal. Her calm and confident face did that for her. People bowed as she passed, her presence soft but strong. Miles had only seen her face on coins and paintings. Seeing her in person made him forget his rough boots and dusty jacket for a moment. She seemed far beyond his world. He turned back to his tools and told himself not to stare. A worker watching the queen could lose his job. But even as he tried to focus, the room grew louder. The orchestra struck a joyful tune, and people raised their glasses to the ceiling. Outside, the first streak of a meteor crossed the sky, golden and fast. The crowd applauded. The old palace trembled slightly, almost as if it too felt excited. Then it happened. One of the large crystal chandeliers hanging above the floor gave a loud crack. Miles looked up and saw the chain snap. The queen was standing right under it. He did not think, shouted and ran forward, pushing through the crowd. Many froze, unsure of what was happening. The glass and metal frame began to fall, turning in slow motion above the lights. Miles reached Leora just in time, grabbed her by the waist and pulled her clear. The chandelier crashed a second later, scattering glass and sparks across the marble floor. People screamed. The music stopped. For several seconds, there was only the sound of glass pieces rolling. Miles lay half on the ground, shielding the queen. When he opened his eyes, she was looking straight at him. Her hair had fallen across her cheeks, her breath fast and warm. Neither spoke. Guards rushed forward, spears raised, shouting orders. They dragged the fallen metal aside and surrounded them both. One of the nobles yelled that the man had attacked the queen. The guards seized Miles roughly, but Leora lifted a hand. Voice was steady, though her chest still rose with fast breaths. "Stop," she said. "He saved me." The hall grew quiet again. The guards hesitated. Leora stood up, smoothing her dress, then turned toward Miles. "What is your name?" she asked. "Miles Carter, Your Majesty," he said, head low. Her lips curved slightly. "Then, Miles Carter, you have my thanks." She walked away before he could answer, surrounded once more by guards and nobility. The doors closed behind her, leaving Miles still stunned, half unsure if he would be punished or rewarded. That night, he sat by the palace gate waiting for the city lights to fade. People talked excitedly about the brave worker who had saved the queen. Some said he would be honored. Others that he would never be heard of again. Miles said nothing. He could still feel the warmth of her hand where he had held her. Above him, another long streak of fire crossed the sky, leaving a bright silver trail. Miles smiled faintly, not knowing why. Perhaps the old saying was right. Sometimes fate did fall from the heavens, and sometimes it landed in the strangest places. For the first time in his life, he looked at the stars and wondered not about machines or repairs, but about what would happen next. Somewhere in the tall palace behind him, Queen Leora was also awake, sitting by her window, thinking about the man who had risked everything to save her. Neither of them knew that this one night, full of falling stars and chance, had already changed the path of their lives forever. Days passed after the night of the falling stars, yet the story of the brave worker spread all through the capital like wind through wheat fields. People spoke his name in taverns and squares. Some called him a hero. Others whispered that no one so lowborn should have touched the queen. But the truth of the night could not be changed. Miles Carter had saved Queen Leora's life with his own hands. In the high rooms of the palace, Queen Leora often found herself hearing the story again and again from her ladies and guards. They told it with excitement, but to her it felt personal and strange. That night had been frightening, not only because of the falling glass, but because of the look in the eyes of the man who had saved her. It was not the look of someone kneeling before power. It was the look of someone who cared more for another's safety than for his own fear. That had stayed with her, even while the court tried to act as if nothing important had happened. By morning, the royal council had begun to argue. The chancellor said that the worker must be dismissed from the city at once to avoid talk. The general said that he should be rewarded quietly for his quick actions, but never allowed near the throne again. Some even suggested that the chandelier had been part of a plot, and they pressed the queen to order an inquiry. Leora listened to everyone and said very little. Her thoughts were already made. On the third day, she gave an order that surprised the entire palace. Miles Carter was to be brought before her. The guards obeyed quickly but grudgingly. To them, this man was nothing more than a mechanic who had accidentally stepped into legend. When they found him near the lower workshops, he was fixing a broken water pump. He looked tired and unsure, but when he was told that the queen wished to see him, he wiped his hands, straightened his jacket, and went quietly. The palace guards led him through wide hallways lined with bright windows and long carpets that felt too soft under his boots. He had never been in such clean silence before. When the grand door opened, he saw Queen Leora waiting alone in her chamber. She had dismissed everyone else. Her dress was simple this time, a soft white fabric that caught the light from the window. The golden crown was gone. Her hair fell free around her shoulders. She did not look like a distant ruler at that moment. She looked like a young woman, curious about the world beyond the throne. Miles bowed deeply, unsure of what to say. His heart thumped hard against his chest. She smiled a little. "You look nervous," she said. "Do I frighten you, Mr. Carter?" "No, Your Majesty," he said quickly, though that was not entirely true. "Only a little." She laughed softly, a sound that made the heavy room feel lighter. She asked him about his home, his work, and his family. He answered as best he could about the machines he repaired, the people he worked with, and the small life he led far from the grand palace. Queen listened closely, asking questions like a curious child. Soon, Miles began to forget his fear and spoke freely. He told her of long nights fixing broken bridges by lantern light, of helping children carry water in his town, of his wish to build something that would last longer than stone. His words came simple and honest. When he finished, the queen said quietly, "You speak differently from the nobles. They use words to show they are important. You use words to show what is true." Miles did not know how to answer, so he bowed again. "I only speak how I know, Your Majesty." Leora walked to the window and looked out at the city. "I have lived here all my life," she said. "These towers are mine. Yet sometimes I feel like a bird kept in a golden cage. Everyone praises me, but no one dares talk to me as an equal." She turned toward him. "That is why I wanted to see the man who pulled me from danger without asking permission." He lowered his eyes. "Anyone would have done the same?" "Perhaps," she said, "but you did. That means something." A long silence grew between them, broken only by the faint sound of birds outside. For reasons neither could explain, the air felt warmer, the world smaller, as if they had both stepped outside the line that divided queen from subject. When he was dismissed, the queen ordered that he'd stay in the city as royal mechanic until further notice. The council was shocked, the nobles angry. But Leora did not care. That night, she stood on her balcony, watching the same stars that had once fallen from the sky. She thought of Miles Carter and his honest eyes. In another street of the city, under the same sky, Miles thought of her too, wondering why fate had chosen him to cross paths with a queen. Both of them knew that something deep and quiet had begun something neither the throne nor the common world could easily control.
The sun rose early over the city of Varian, casting golden light across the palace walls. It was a calm morning, yet Queen Leora's mind was full of unrest. It had been several weeks since the night Miles Carter had saved her. In that time, he had become a quiet presence at the palace, working on broken machines and forgotten tools. The Queen often found reasons to visit the workshops, though the Council pretended not to notice. What began as duty had turned into something more, a strange warmth that followed her every day. Miles always bowed when she entered, but she saw how his eyes brightened just a little when they met hers. They spoke of simple things at first, about the machines he repaired or the gardens outside. He made her laugh more than she had in years. She had grown used to noble men filled with pride and polite lies. Miles spoke honestly without care for position or gold. That made him dangerous in the eyes of others. The councillors began to whisper. Lord Hadrian, the Chancellor, often warned her during meetings. "Your Majesty," he said one morning, his voice thin and worried, "the people talk. They say you spend too much time among your workers. It lowers the crown." Leora turned to him calmly. "The crown sits on my head wherever I go, Lord Hadrian. It does not grow lighter or heavier by the company I keep." Still, she could feel the walls around her start to close. Rumors spread through the capital like wind through dry leaves. Some said she was already in love with the worker. Others said Miles had bewitched her with tricks of words. The Queen knew these were lies, but lies have power when spoken by enough voices. Miles began to sense the change as well. In the palace corridors, nobles gave him cold stares. Servants who used to greet him now kept their distance. At night, he lay awake in his small room, staring at the stone ceiling, thinking of the Queen. He feared what his presence might cost her. One evening, when the sky was deep orange and the city lay quiet, Miles decided to leave. He packed his tools and walked toward the stables. But before he could mount a horse, a familiar voice stopped him. "You were not going to say goodbye?" He turned. Queen Leora stood behind him, dressed not in silk, but in a simple cloak. Her eyes shone in the dim light. Miles hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. "I cannot stay, Your Majesty. My being here brings you trouble. The council will turn against you. The nobles whisper already." The Queen stepped closer. "You think leaving will silence them? They will whisper no matter what I do. Let them talk. I rule this land, not their tongues." He lowered his head. "But you deserve peace. I cannot be the reason you lose it." Leora looked at him for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Since that night, every man in the court speaks to my crown. You are the only one who speaks to me." For a time they stood there, in silence. The gentle wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of music from distant streets. She reached out, almost to take his hand, but stopped. Duty and feeling stood between them like a wall of glass. Before either could speak, a guard appeared, bowing stiffly. "Your Majesty, the council requests your presence. There is unrest in the south, riots near the city border." Leora nodded, calm again. When the guard left, she turned to Miles. "Do not go far. I may have need of your skill soon." He watched her walk away until she vanished through the palace gates. That night, the city was restless. Smoke from distant fires painted the sky grey. People protested against new taxes and against those they saw as traitors. Some shouted the Queen's name in anger, saying she had grown weak. Others shouted it in loyalty, promising to defend her against any foe. From her balcony, Leora looked out across her kingdom and wondered if love was truly meant for those who wore crowns. She wanted to follow her heart, yet she could hear the cries of the people, the duty that bound her like heavy chains. Down in the workshops, Miles worked on repairing the defense engines, his mind far away from the buzzing of machines. He thought of her face in the torchlight, her voice steady even when frightened. He did not know what the coming days would bring, but he knew one thing with certainty. No matter what happened to him, he would protect her. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills, and the city listened in tense silence. The air held the weight of something approaching, not yet seen but already felt. In that moment, both the queen and the worker could sense that the peace between duty and desire would soon be broken forever.
The morning the rebellion reached the city began with the sound of bells. They did not ring for ceremony or prayer, but for warning. Across the palace grounds, soldiers hurried to their posts while traders closed their shops and pushed carts into hiding. The air smelled of smoke and fear. From her chamber window, Queen Leora saw dark lines of riders on the southern road. Banners lifted in the wind, marked with red and black. The rebels were no longer a rumor. They had come to claim the throne. She turned from the window and called for her council. The nobles entered, pale and shaken. Some demanded that she flee to the northern fortress. Others insisted the guards handle the matter. Leora listened without moving. When they finished arguing among themselves, she said quietly, "If I abandon this city, I am no longer its queen. I will stay." Her voice held no tremor. The men looked at her, surprised at her calm. Finally, the general bowed. "Then we defend the palace, your majesty. But we are outnumbered." "Then," she said, "we will have to fight with more than swords." She sent for Miles Carter. He arrived with his hands still stained with oil, his face serious. "You asked for me, your majesty?" Leora met his eyes. "You once told me machines can do what people cannot. Can you make them fight for us?" Miles thought for a moment. "I can make them hold the gates, buy us time. But it will be risky." "Every choice we make now is risky," she said. He nodded and left at once, gathering workers and tools from every corner of the palace. They built defenses through the night steam chambers that launched fire, walls of reinforced metal, bridges that could rise and fall by the pull of a lever. In the deepest hour of the night, when exhaustion hung heavy on everyone, Miles found the queen again. She sat by a map table covered in candles, her eyes fixed on the lines of battle. "You should rest," he said. "So should you," she answered. He smiled faintly. "I cannot rest while the city stands on fire." She looked at him and saw the tired honesty in his face. The same look that had made her trust him from the first moment. For a brief second, they forgot the crown and the kingdom. They saw only each other in the quiet glow of candlelight. Dawn came before either could speak of what they both felt. The rebel army struck fast. The ground shook under the roar of engines and the thunder of cannons. Miles's machine screamed to life, spilling light and heat across the walls. The defenders worked beside the workers side by side. The queen rode to the front gate in silver armor, her sword resting at her side. Even her own guards tried to stop her, but she only said, "A crown is not meant to hide behind stone." Then she joined the fight. The rebels pushed hard against the city walls. Miles ran from one machine to another, tightening bolts, fixing wires, shouting orders above the sound of battle. The air was filled with dust, smoke, and the smell of burning metal. At one point, a fire broke out near the eastern tower, cutting off a group of soldiers. Miles dashed through the flames to free them, his hands blistered and blackened but steady. By afternoon, the palace halls shook with explosions. Leora fought at the gate, holding her sword high even when her arm grew heavy. Her horse fell beneath her, struck by falling stone. Before the enemy could strike her down, Miles appeared, pulling her out of the rubble. "You again," she said, breathing hard. "Where else would I be?" he answered, helping her stand. Together, they fought their way back through the courtyard. The rebels broke the outer wall, pouring into the palace, but the defenders refused to fall. Miles reached the main power core, the engine that ran the defense system. It was near collapse, bright with heat and shaking from pressure. "Or if it bursts, the palace will fall," one of his helpers cried. And Miles looked toward the hall where the queen fought and said quietly, "Then it will not burst." He jammed a metal rod into the socket, forcing the flow of energy back. Flames licked his arm, pain shot through him, but he held until the system stabilized. When the last wave of rebels charged, Leora lifted her sword again, her armor cracked, her face streaked with dust. Miles stumbled to her side, his arm wrapped in cloth. Together they led the final defense. The cry of the loyal guards grew louder until, at last, the rebel leader fell. As the sun set, silence returned. The city stood battered but unbroken. Soldiers dropped to their knees in relief. The queen lowered her sword slowly and turned to Miles. He was leaning against a pillar, pale but smiling. "You saved this kingdom," she told him. He shook his head. "No, Your Majesty. We saved each other." She went to him and held his hand, ignoring the watching eyes. The flames outside had died, but the fire between them still burned bright. The night had come again, quiet and heavy, carrying the scent of smoke and victory. And for the first time since she had taken the throne, Queen Leora felt not alone but whole. The days after the battle felt slow and strange. The city of Varian was quiet again, but it was not the same place it had been before. The streets were scarred, the towers blackened with smoke, yet life returned slowly. People walked through the market again. Children played near the fountains. The kingdom had survived the fire. Queen Leora walked through the courtyards every morning, greeting her guards and the workers who repaired the broken walls. No longer did she lock herself away in the throne room. She spoke gently to everyone, asked about their families, and listened to their worries. Wherever she went, voices whispered, "Our queen fought beside us." She did not run. But each time she passed the workshop, her eyes searched for one man. Miles Carter had been recovering from his burns and wounds. The healers said he was strong enough to walk again, but he still limped a little. He spent most of his time helping rebuild the damaged machines, working in silence. One afternoon, Leora found him there, bent over a piece of metal shaped like a broken wing. He looked up when he heard her steps. "Your Majesty," he said quietly with a slight bow. She smiled faintly. "I told you once not to call me that when we are alone." He set his tools down. "Habit, I guess." Leora stepped closer. The smell of oil and iron filled the air. "The city stands today because of you," she said. "You could have died at the gates. Why did you stay when you could have fled?" Miles looked down at his hands, the skin still marked by fire. "Because I gave you my word," he said simply. "And because I could not watch the kingdom you love fall apart." She studied his face. The same honest expression she had seen from the first night. There was no pride in his words, no wish for glory. Only truth. That evening, the council met for the first time since the victory. The nobles demanded new taxes, new walls, new soldiers. Some wanted to punish the towns that had risen with the rebels. Others wanted to reward those who had stayed loyal. But no one agreed on anything. The chamber filled with angry voices until Leora raised her hand and silence fell. "This kingdom burned because some sought power and others turned away from truth," she said. "We rebuild not only our walls, but our hearts. The people will not be punished for speaking. They will be heard. And the man who saved this palace will be honored, not hidden." The council murmured in surprise. Lord Hadron frowned. "Your Majesty, you cannot mean to raise a commoner above the noble class." Leora looked at him calmly. "I mean to raise a man above the limits of foolish pride. Miles Carter will stand beside Manat behind me." The chamber burst into noise, but she left them arguing and walked out. A few days later, the palace bells rang again. This time they did not warn of war, but of celebration. The city gathered in the main square, dressed in bright colors. Flowers hung from gates, and music filled the air. For the first time in years, the people saw their queen not on a throne, but standing among them. Miles stood at her side, nervous but steady, his simple clothes replaced by a coat of deep blue. The crowd watched as she turned to him, her eyes full of calm strength. "On the night of the falling stars," Leora said, her voice carrying across the square, "a man saved my life. Since then, he has saved my kingdom. He reminded me that courage can live in any heart, no matter how humble. Today I choose not only to honor him, but to join my life with his." Gasps spread through the crowd, then cheers rose like thunder. Miles looked at her in disbelief, but she smiled. "We saved each other," she said softly. "Then let that be true every day that follows." Before the four winds of Varian, before every noble and every worker, Queen Leora and Miles Carter were joined as husband and wife. No court could deny it, and no battle could undo it. The bells of the city rang longer and louder than ever before. That night, the city shone with lanterns and laughter. Music echoed through streets that had once known only screams. People danced under the moon, celebrating not only the marriage of a queen and a worker, but the hope that everyone in the kingdom could rise again. Miles and Leora stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sea of lights below. He turned to her, still unsure whether any of it was real. "Do you think they will accept me?" he asked. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "They already have," she said. "They see what I see." A man who stood in fire and never looked away. Down below, voices called their names. The wind carried the sound of their laughter across the city like a promise. The night that had once changed everything had led them here to peace, to love, and to a new beginning that glowed as bright as the stars above.